ice crystals growing in them. But despite the dogged tiredness, he'd used the precious hours meant for sleeping to write about his childhood as if he could purge it from his soul. It hadn't worked, not completely. But the publishing world, and then the public, had loved his cathartic musings about his formative years on a struggling, wind-blown croft surrounded by the ever-present sea. When he'd hit bestseller lists all over the world, the media had billed him as a wunderkind. Intoxicated by his first success, he'd quickly written a second book about his adventures in Norway. While working on the ice, he'd encountered a pair of orphaned polar bear cubs that he'd rescued from starvation and kept alive until they could be relocated to a zoo. His fans had adored the tale. With all the dosh he made from his first books, he'd left the roughneck life behind and headed to Glasgow. Then, a few years later, he'd moved to the welcome obscurity of London. In a city of over 8 million, no one cared if a man chose to sup alone. Since his author photo was taken from the back with him staring out at the sea, no one recognized him. He could eat, drink, and write in peace. Nobody expected him to converse or even to make small talk. After a childhood on a remote island, he'd finally found solitude and peace in the teeming crowds of one of the largest cities in Europe. But the public didn't like his wry witticisms about city life. Sales from his next 2 books plummeted, and that had led to the fateful call with his editor a few weeks ago. Magnus could still hear the man's rough Bostonian accent growling in his ear. "People aren't buying your urban jungle crap. You've gotten too acerbic, too much misanthropy and too little humor. Get back to your roots, small towns, living creatures. I know the perfect place for you. It's been all over the internet, a zoo in a place called Sagebrush Flats. It's got the animal angle from your first books, but in a different enough locale so it'll be fresh. Go work there for a season. Write about it. That I can sell. The other stuff I can't." Because Magnus preferred to keep his current lifestyle and not go back to being a roughneck, he once again found himself in the back of beyond. The idea of shoveling manure again didn't bother him. Animals and their shite he could take, but the humankind, that was the problem. Across from him, the bonny blonde still beamed. Welcoming, charming, sweet. And he didn't believe any of it. She'd plopped her arse down in the booth across from him for one reason and one reason only. Gossip. She wanted to be the very first to meet the hulking stranger so she could blether to her friends about him the following morn. Magnus wasn't a chap who typically attracted the lasses, especially those as braw as the likes of this one. "I swear none of us bite," the woman joked and waited a beat for Magnus to speak. He didn't. If he did, he knew he'd block on at least one of the words. Unfortunately, the woman stayed. "We're all very friendly." Magnus longed for a big city with its pubs and cafes, where a man could find solitude among millions of strangers. Really anything but a dusty town where the only establishments open on a Monday night were a pizza takeout shop and a curious American diner, restaurant, bar hybrid called the Prairie Dog Cafe. It had all the ills of a local British pub and none of the charm. The assortment of old farm equipment and elk antlers tacked to the walls wasn't to Magnus's fancy. Give him an ancient stone building in London with a cheerful fire to chase away the dreek, and he'd be content. "Come on," the blonde insisted as she rose from the table. Magnus shook his head, but the lass didn't listen. She reached forward and grabbed his hand. At the unexpected contact, Magnus jerked back, jamming his elbow hard against the wooden booth. He didn't like being touched, especially by a stranger. He appreciated even less the strange jolt of awareness zipping through him. He didn't want to lust after the dafty woman. Surprise showed in the blonde's leaf green